6. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr Speaker, this question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by all his statements?
Right
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Does he stand by his statement of 13 October, quotes, I would certainly describe my style as open and transparent, end of quotes.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes.
Supplementary question?
Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston.
Well, if that's true, why did his government withhold the 2 child poverty reports for 17 months in an abuse of the Official Information Act?
Right Honourable Prime
Mr
Minister.
Speaker, the member really should direct that at the responsible minister. It wasn't in my office, but I think I'm correct in saying, I could stand corrected, that it was because it was a work in progress and there were particular reasons as it was going through that process.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Having regard to the Honourable Jim McClay's comment in this House when the Official Information Bill was being passed, and he said this, the underlying philosophy of the bill is that the Official Information Act should be made available unless there is good reason for withholding it. That being the case, why has he admitted on the 15th of October using delaying tactics for political purposes?
Right Honourable
Mr Speaker, I haven't.
Supplementary question.
Point of order, Speaker.
Point of order. Right Honourable Winston.
Speaker, I seek to table the evidence that he did admit that on the 15th of October.
Order. What is the source of this evidence?
It is a Radio New Zealand transcript.
That is also available to all members. Does the member have...
Well, he's just denied it, for goodness sake.
Order. And I heard that. Does the member have a further supplementary?
Yes, I do.
Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Why are US congressmen kept well informed about the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, whilst New Zealand parliamentarians are kept totally in the dark on this matter?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, every system's different, so I can't speak for what happens in the United States. But what I can say in New Zealand has been a long-standing tradition for free trade agreements to be negotiated essentially behind closed doors until at which point an agreement is reached, because we don't believe it's in the best interest to be discussing those in the public domain because it weakens our bargaining position.
Question number 7, the Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Why has he